I'd like you to picture the scene. A 41-year-old mother of two with absolutely zero knowledge of ski mountaineering standing at the top of the vertical race at the World Cup event in Verbier 2014. She has been drafted in at the very last minute and asked to translate the French commentators commentating into English. The sun is shining, the crowds are buzzing with anticipation. And suddenly the helicopter starts whopping above and the ripple drifts up the crowd, the cowbells start jangling, and 150 meters away, one of the most legendary finishes to a vertical race in SkiMo history is unfolding before her very eyes. Kilian Jornet, the Spanish legend, is neck and neck with Mathieu Jacquemus, the young Frenchman, and they are powering up the hill like the devil himself is chasing them. The most extraordinary sight, though, is that Jornet is not on his skis, but carrying them and running as fast as the Frenchman is skinning. The crowd is going wild. The other commentator is puce with the frenzy of relaying it step for step. The mother of two is reporting for the radio and, quite frankly, hasn't actually a clue which athlete is which. But the near hysteria is catching, and she is bellowing into her recording device, regardless of whether she knows the facts or not. The athletes cross the line and they collapse in a heaving, panting mess of snot and spit. The mother of two is rather shocked. She has never seen this level of exertion before. No one else seems particularly surprised, though, so she takes pictures, and within 10 minutes, she is interviewing the extraterrestrial himself, who explains that as he lifted his ski just below the finish line, the helicopter got too close and blew the ski off. So he simply took the other one off and started running. And that, although I didn't know it at the time, was the beginning of my ski mountaineering commentating career. I'm Catie Friend, and this is a story of how I went from being someone who did no sport as a child or a young adult to having no real interest in many sports to going on to do the Patrouille des Glaciers from Zermatt to Verbier and becoming the ISMF World Cup SkiMo commentator, and now for the live streaming. SkiMo is a massive passion of mine. I love the freedom, I love the fitness, I love the kit, and I am super geeky about following the elite athletes. And occasionally, as I've said, I race myself. But it hasn't always been that way. I was born and brought up in the west coast of Scotland by a horse riding mother and a mountain loving father. And it is one of my biggest regrets that I didn't love the mountains as much as I do now, when my dad was still actively hill walking, mountaineering and ski touring. In this picture, he was around about 80 and could really only do skinning to a lift that could take him down because his eyesight was failing. And but this was the stage that my 6-year-old son at the time and I were at, you know, just pootling along. That's the balcony route, as they call it. Ellie will recognize that, from Rouennais round to La Chaux in Verbier. In fact, growing up, I really hated sport. I hated it so much. I'd been born with dislocated hips, both of them, that were not diagnosed until I was walking, which meant I was in plaster for a year with both femurs broken and reset. And in classic 1970s advice, I was told just to take it easy. No physio, no sport, nothing too strenuous. I'm not quite sure how learning to ride a horse and ski before I can remember actually fits into that, but that's all I ever did. However, I hated all sport other than that. Hockey lessons, my absolute idea of hell. So I grew to be a teenager and a young adult who avoided all sport. And as a consequence, a lot of really great adventures, because they all just sounded quite difficult. I liked to party and work, and despite loving travel and new experiences, I still never loved sport. And then I married the sportiest man you could ever imagine. And in fact, now I come to think of it, all my boyfriends had been really super sporty, and I'm pretty sure that's something for a therapist to work through, but there you go. My super sporty husband has been at the Ironman World Championships, the Triathlon European and World Championships, has done the PDG several times, the Marathon des Sables, climbed nearly all the 4,000 meter peaks in Switzerland, and shows no signs of slowing down. But that's pretty intimidating for somebody who knows that, you know, that she needs to get fit. But I didn't know how. I didn't know how to get there. I'd been doing a little bit of skinning with friends when our kids were in nursery or with other people. We'd grab a coffee and a cheese sandwich and wearing our alpine boots and old Dynamere, I think they're called, bindings, we'd clunk up the hill. And oh, there's the sporty husband just joining. And we'd trudge slowly for about half an hour to a mountain restaurant, have a hot chocolate, and be utterly thrilled with ourselves and our sporting prowess. And I remember once between Christmas and New Year one year, gaily setting off, husbands looking after babies, and deciding after an hour that I couldn't really go any further. I had a massive blister, and we bumped into some friends and chatted while we, de-rigged and got our jackets on and clicked our boots in, sorted out our bindings, and waved a smiley cheerio and ground to a massive halt because we'd forgotten to take our skins off. So that's how it was back in the day, and quite how I decided I would take it to the next level, I can't actually remember. But slowly and surely, I got my own skis, my sort of lighter touring boots, and I started skinning with amazing women who I didn't know quite as well, but who had a lot more ski touring and ski mountaineering experience than myself. And by this time, look, I was doing sport. I was quite getting into it. I was enjoying the fitness. I was enjoying the freedom. I was mostly cycling in the summer. And so it just seemed to sort of be a natural progression. We were living in Switzerland full time by that stage, and I was able to say yes to adventures. And being surrounded by people who were fit and adventurous was such a huge boost for me. And although I still am sometimes a little bit intimidated by people who are really super sporty, I decided that if I couldn't beat them, I had to join them. So deciding to do the small PDG, here we go, was a massive decision for me, actually. I trained all winter with my teammates and did lots of days with a guide and discovered not only some breathtaking and amazing parts of the area we live in. I'm in Verbier, if I hadn't made that clear already. And I also learned a lot about myself. I learned how to dig deep. I learned that I am absolutely next to useless if I don't feed myself on time on a ski tour. And I learned how to work as a team. And given my absolute hatred of hockey lessons back in the day, that was a new thing for me. And I also learned, quite importantly, that having all the big talk is one thing, but if you don't put the work in, it doesn't mean anything. So as I say, we toured with guides, we saw some really amazing places, and we plodded up and down the pistes, getting the miles in, and I raced for the first time. So thinking that joining the veterans races would be a little bit like, rocking up for a 5K in the UK. I'm sort of there, middle-aged mum with sort of the basic okay gear. And I turn up and even the septuagenarians are clad in skin-tight lycra with all the gear built like a toothpick, raring to go. And this insanely sporty part of the world, they don't do really casual. They don't do casual on the start line. They do massively intimidating. However, after the wake-up call, I soon sort of learned to take it at my own pace, to take it my teammates' pace, and make it not about not being last. And these pictures quite frankly, I have absolutely no idea how I was smiling. I've never always been a sucker for the camera because I was in a world of deep pain. The one on the left is the Patrouille des Aiguilles Rouges, which is around about Everlaine. And the one on the right is our local race, the Intégrale du Rogneux, both teams of 2. As you can see, I've got the 0.1 on my bib numbers there, 6.1 and 807.1. That means I'm number 1 of a team of 2, or it could be a team of 4, whatever, but I am in a team. So a few times I only just achieved the goal of not being last, but I really got the bug for standing on a start line. I enjoyed the training mostly. I hated the pre-race adrenaline, but once I understood how to breathe through it and not let it set me out the gate like a flipping greyhound, putting my heart rate up to a bazillion beats per minute, it got better. And despite my nearly 6-foot stature, which is not ideal for defying gravity in an uphill kind of race, I absolutely love a vertical race. And anybody who's watching from Scotland or who's been involved in skiing in Scotland, SkiMo in Scotland, will recognize that suit on the right. That is the SkiMo Scotland one piece, which I only ever wear when I'm at my absolute fittest because it's quite revealing. And it is one of my favorites. And I was just explaining to Declan earlier that when they came out, I missed the deadline and I couldn't get one, but I phoned Crazy in Italy and I said, look, you just have to get it to Switzerland and I promise I will wear it. So there I am at the beginning of the Latsuma Vertical a couple of years ago. Many of these races obviously haven't been run for a while because of COVID, but that was a particularly great race, an evening vertical, which is just something I really like. The reason I like verticals is because it's really simple. You start at the bottom and you go until you get to the top. I don't have to feed myself. I don't have to do transitions. I don't have to pace with a teammate. I don't have to ski in those redonkulous skis. And I just know what heart rate to sit at and I go. And then it's done within 45 minutes and I can go home and feel very smug and proud of myself. The big group of us on the left, that was the very first race I ever did, the Patrouille des Aiguilles Rouges. And there's a group of us from all over, just friends that we met really through doing ski mountaineering. And the man in orange next to me, that's my husband. And then the rest are friends and one guide. However, one of the things I learned to love was the training journey. And the journey towards a big race, I know it sounds really cheesy, but I hadn't really got it because I hadn't had that experience before. But the journey towards a big race is massive, and it's even more massive if you have great teammates to share it with. And the one, so these are various, this is my first team, the team I entered the small Patrouille des Glaciers with in 2016. That's the top of Rogneux, I think the bottom left one there, but I can't actually remember. I can tell you that the one on the right is us at the top of Grand Combin, which we did on foot, all by ourselves, which was massively, even more satisfying when we came up over the lip and met all the people who had arrived by helicopter. And that was one of my proudest ever moments. I have to say, though, we had the better day out because the ski down was pretty shoddy. So there we go. So I'd been watching the Patrouille des Glaciers, the PDG, arrive in Verbier for years. I'd seen my husband coming in. I'd seen the massive crowds, the excitement, and how proud people in Verbier are to see people that they know and to cheer on the elites when they arrive. And we trained all winter for this in 2016. And I learned to be fitter, I learned to ski better, and I had a greater appreciation of the mountains. So you can imagine our disappointment when we were already billeted in Arolla, ready to go, and it was cancelled. It was stopped. And we were disappointed, is probably the understatement of the year. Really, really, really disappointed. And all that winter, we had rolled our eyes and decided it was complete madness to train for the big PDG all winter. And we all had small children, and who would want to skin overnight? Because that's just crazy. But somewhere in the middle of June 2016, I casually said to one of my teammates, I'm sort of thinking that maybe we could do the big one. And she squealed, me too. And so we found a third and we made a plan. And over the 4-year period between the two teams, we were two of us that overlapped and we had a different third. We did some races, and these are races that I can highly recommend and I can send links to if anybody's interested. They're all in Switzerland, that's what I know. We had the Patrouille de la Maya, which we came second in the small race, and that's my first and probably only ever podium in my life, which is a complete shock and delight. We did the Patrouille des Aiguilles Rouges, which I just told you about, the Tartines race, which is a vertical race. All of these mostly happen every 2 years. I did the Intégrale de Rogneux, which is our local race here, our local race that isn't the PDG. The Trophée de Mouvron, which happens every year and has done for over 70 years. That's above Bay and Aigle, if you know that sort of area. The Latsuma Vertical that I mentioned earlier that I did in my SkiMo Scotland kit, and the Les Diablerets 3D, which I can't actually remember where that is, but it's not terribly far from here anyway. And these are pictures of us training, racing. I don't know why we were taking pictures in the middle of a race, but there you go. We were clearly having a lovely time and finishing. The things that I loved about learning to race was I loved the kit. It was very exciting to get new kit, to get all really geared up. I loved testing. I loved trialing it. I liked seeing what socks were best. I liked getting us matching tops. I liked finding out, you know, the lightest kit that we could all afford and that sort of thing. I liked learning how to learn to eat at the right time and what to eat, and to eat at the same time as my teammates, so that we, you know, one was trying to eat and the others are powering away like crazy, and you're dying and choking at the back. So we'd have a 45-minute, we got to eat now, and everybody would slow, find something to eat and start eating. And so Operation PDG was underway. And I think one of these photos there on the left is Ellie's. Thank you, Ellie, who's in the room. But these are just some of the, not on snow, but running down to the end of races, pictures that are easier for people to get, let's say. And there's a smiley, happy pre-dawn race start photo. Again, I've no idea how we were smiling because, yeah, it was a very, that was a tough day. That was the Diableret 3D, which we raced as one of our B races before the Patrouille des Glaciers. And there, look at that. Oh, I think I should have that framed, put next to my bed on a podium for the first and probably only time in my life. However, in the meantime, during all these years of discovering sport, starting to race myself, going through the journey that I've been talking about, I had been working for the local tourist radio right at the start. And in 2014, the ISMF World Cup came to Verbier. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, the very last minute, they needed an English-speaking commentator to work alongside the French speaker. And so I ended up at that famous finish line with Kylian Jornet and Matteo Giacomo. And the organizing committee liked what I did and invited me back to commentate, do exactly the same job, but for the whole week of the World Championships the following year in 2015. And there I saw the sprint race, the individual race, the team races, and as well as the relay for the very first time. And I learned so much, which wasn't hard because quite frankly, I knew nothing. But I learned from Silvano Gadden, who's known as the voice of SkiMo, and anyone who is in the audience who has done the PDG, the Patrouille des Glaciers, will know that he is the voice. He's the voice that sets you off from Zermatt, and he's the voice that brings you home to Verbier. And he taught me such a huge amount. I was very, very lucky. And at the end of that fabulous whirlwind of a week, I was completely hooked. I loved it. I just loved it. And the president of the Andorran SkiMo Federation, the late, great, and very generous Jaume Esteve, asked me if I would consider coming to commentate their World Cup. And I was pretty blown away because I didn't even know that that was a thing, that I could, that there was a World Cup circuit, really, that I could do this thing that I loved, that I had just discovered purely by accident. And it always makes me smile, and you know, that the small things in life, like for example, the reason I was there on that start line in 2014 and that finish line is because my boss couldn't do it. And he said, Catie, you need to go and do it for me. And there we go. I found myself being invited to commentate in Andorra. So for the next few years, I would eagerly await the announcement of the World Cup calendar and contact all the local organising committees and pitch my services. I speak French and English, so probably about half said yes, nearly all the French-speaking ones, so in France and in Switzerland. And always Andorra, they always have a World Cup every year. And they, I think I've just 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, come back from my 6th or 7th visit to Andorra to do that. And so what a huge privilege that is. And I learned my trade kind of the hard way. I made mistakes. I sweated buckets with nerves. I turned up with no knowledge of venues, co-commentators, and I left my still quite young children at home with au pairs, meaning that mummy guilt was a pretty massive part of the early years. And I didn't know how much to charge, so I was thrilling local organising committees with my exceptionally cheap fees for years, annoyingly. And I took very early flights and super late flights just so that I was away as little as possible. And in the summer, I would work for free doing triathlons and trail races just to get the experience. And eventually, as I was starting to get a little bit worn down with it all, it's hard. It means, and the winter is hard anyway, because the kids have got so many activities, and it was starting to just get quite, I was getting a bit weary. The ISMF, which is the International Ski Mountaineering Federation, who runs all of the World Cup and with whom I had been working alongside, they asked me if I would be one of their 2 official commentators, race commentators, which that guaranteed me some work over the winter. It meant I was officially part of the team, and I was briefed properly. I didn't have to make it up when I got there. And I sort of started to feel like my hard graft was paying off. And these pictures here, there's a range there, that top left, in the pouring rain in Madonna di Campiglio, excuse me, in 2019. We stood in the rain doing the sprint race for 6 hours. Very, excuse me, very good advert for Dynafit, because I was not wet under that jacket, that is for sure. And the top left there, that's me in Andorra. Bottom right, no idea, but it's certainly in COVID times, because we didn't used to commentate in masks. And on the bottom left, that is me commentating at the World Championships in Villars in 2019. And I was live streaming the race from a tent, while my colleague on the screen there was doing the sort of finish line react videos, interviews, I beg your pardon. And we were live on Canal 9 and RTS, which I'm pretty sure is maybe the first time they've had an entire program all in English. So maybe that's a claim to fame, who knows? But in the years since I've been commentating, I've been in Italy, France, Andorra, Spain, Switzerland, Germany, and I've visited just some of the most gorgeous, really phenomenal mountain ranges. And I always take my skis and skins, and I try to get out to see the course where I can, the individual course, get some training done, see the course, then I've got something to talk about. And when I was course speaker, my job involved hosting and often translating the briefings, which are now called team captains meetings. But the night before a race, all the coaches come together and they're briefed on what's going to happen the following day. I commentated on the races, including calling racers to the start, making sure people are in the right place at the right time, and doing flower ceremonies and official prize givings. Cannot tell you how much I do not like doing prize givings. I find them so unbelievably stressful because it's somebody's massive moment and I just have this fear of getting it wrong. So I don't miss doing prize giving ceremonies, although I have to say I was doing one on Saturday in Morgin at the World Cup as a help out to the ISMF. So one of the things I learned over the years as the course commentator is that that role often has a unique view of race day. We're not athletes, coaches, organizers, or volunteers, but we have contact with all of them. And that's not something that many other roles do. We are constantly pulled in every direction. We have to keep an eye on timings. We have to keep an eye on nervous referees, stressed out event managers, irate coaches, and jiggling athletes, jiggling, not coming to the line till the very last second, while all the time maintaining a constant stream of information and good cheer and not get athletes' names wrong. So it's challenging sometimes. And I learned that with the slip of a tongue, you can cause annoyance, upset, misunderstanding. And you also learn that everybody comes to you first and that pretty much everybody thinks they can do a better job than you. We've all done it. We've all shouted at the telly, "Oh, come on, how difficult can it be?" Can be a little challenging. And some of my favorite memories always include the thrilling racing, incredible athletic prowess, and such as the Kilian Jornet story that I started with at the beginning. The year after that race, at exactly the same spot, we were in the most glorious sunshine at the top of the vertical in Verbier again. But down below us was the thickest, foggiest, craziest inversion we'd had that I'd remembered seeing. And when Kilian Jornet came up through the clouds, I have stolen this picture from the internet, that's why it's a bit blurry, but it's a super famous photo from that year's World Championships. He came up through the clouds all on his own, and that is the biggest SkiMo crowd I have ever seen at a World Cup. But well, there weren't many before, but certainly since anyway. And the atmosphere was absolutely electric. And he later said he had no idea why he had his poles in the air like that, because it's not something he normally does. Certainly, he was still a good few hundred meters from the finish line there. So the photographer got very lucky, but it was just the most glorious sight to see him coming up there all on his own with the huge crowds. And that same week in Verbier in 2015, I saw the Queen of SkiMo, Leticia Aru from France, start in the relay just as her rival Maud Matisse was already halfway up the first climb. So far, really far from her. And I saw her thunder around that race course with the most astonishing display of power I had ever seen up close and personal. And she managed to finish ahead of the Swiss athlete, despite being half the course behind her when she started. Absolutely extraordinary. Also in 2015, I was very excited to meet the Great Britain SkiMo team. Maybe you will recognize some of these faces here. That's the women only. I've never sadly seen such a turnout of British SkiMo athletes since, so no pressure, but it would be great. But I did feel very proud to see them and to meet them and to have my picture taken with them. And I've also loved over the years watching the rise of the smaller nations, because this sport is dominated by France, Switzerland, and Italy. They absolutely dominate. They have huge teams. They have very massive grassroots programs. And I've loved watching the rise of the Austrians, for example. They have athletes such as Jakob Hermann, who went on to race with Kilian Jornet, to the seemingly unstoppable Paul Verbniak, who is in his first year as a senior. Well, I have to say, actually, when I wrote this presentation, he was seemingly unstoppable. And on Saturday, he skied full force into a tree, which did actually stop him. So he's fine, by the way. But he's just incredible. They have a really great team of coaches there, and they have one of the surprises of the year, a full-time teacher called Sarah Dreyer, who has been a big surprise in the vertical races, in the women's verticals. I'm also loving watching the incredible work going on in the United States. They have their self-funded grassroots program, and it's an absolute joy to watch. They are just going at it like you would imagine Americans would. They've got Olympics in their sights, and they really want to, it's a huge country, so they've got to try and balance and get everybody together, and they're working so hard. They always turn up at the World Championships with, well, they didn't last year because of COVID, but with sort of one of the biggest, most enormous teams. And they're just so enthusiastic and so open about saying, we are here to learn. And that, in the middle of the picture there, is Grace Staberg. She is in her final year as an under 20 female athlete, and she is doing really well. It's a very small category, but she's a very powerful athlete, very serious. She's only, I think she might be 20 now, but she's not long 20. And that was me bringing her across the line, winning, I think, her very first vertical race in Berchtesgaden in Germany, which was the last race we did as we all raced home to escape COVID lockdowns in 2020. And one of the things I love seeing, and we were talking just very briefly about before, is the skiing. The skiing is enough to blow your mind, and I've got some great pictures coming up in a minute. But they're skiing on skis that are tiny, ridiculous tiny. Their ski boots are like slippers, and the Italians particularly are like absolutely bonkers on their skis. They are so fast and so straight lining it down anything they possibly can. So that is always a joy. Robert Antonioli, who's the world #1, if you ever get a chance to see him come down an off-piste route, I highly recommend it. Although not if you're of a nervous disposition, perhaps. So as Declan was saying earlier, the Olympics are now securely on the horizon. It's been a bit of a battle. When I say a battle, the overall federation and the country federations have worked extremely hard. I happen to think, it's not my own personal opinion, but it's a thought that because it is in Italy and because Italy has a huge SkiMo following, it was a bit of a shoe-in. The Italian the Olympic Committee invited them, so it's an invitational sport in Milan Cortina 2026. And there's a little bit of fear within the SkiMo community. I can share that with you. It's not a secret that the sport they love is being a little bit dumbed down, made for TV, losing its roots, in some ways not the thing that they all set out to do, which is be in the high mountains. And they're justified in their thinking, because we've been live streaming since December, and already having the TV cameras has demanded changes. We've had to change when we do the flower ceremonies. We've had to change the timings of some of the races. But I think with proper management, we can have both high mountain racing and good TV. An example of that is in Andorra in January, and this weekend in Montjean in Switzerland. We had phenomenal individual races with great technical courses, lots of vertical and off-piste descents, but that also they passed right through the resort so spectators can see the athletes. I thought it might be interesting to let you know a little very small snippet about what are the Olympic disciplines within the sport. They are the vertical race, the sprint race, the individual race, and the relay. And forgive me if you know this already, but I thought a quick explanation might help. So the vertical is as simple as it sounds. You start at the bottom and you get to the top as fast as possible. It's never more than 700 meters of vertical, no helmet, no backpack, no downhill. It's the pure sufferfest of the sport. And I'm not kidding when I say they arrive in a great mess of snot and spit. There is just insane watching them come over the line. The current world champions there are Rémi Bonnet of Switzerland and Axel Gachet-Mollaret of France, who are both already having a really great season this year. The sprint is a short race. That might sound quite obvious, but no more, the round takes no more than about 3.5 minutes for the fastest athletes, and it's over a maximum of 80 meters for the men, and it's usually about 65 for the women. They skin up, they do a boot pack, they skin some more before they take their skins off. They ski down, mostly off piste or certainly through gates, over jumps. The weekend, last week in Morgin, we had ski cross bumps for them to go over. They have qualification rounds, quarterfinals, semi-finals, and a final for each category. And it can go well, or your luck can run out. The women's final last Thursday was probably the classic example of everything that could possibly go wrong for every single athlete. And the woman that won said, oh, it was just luck, but I'm afraid that's the name of the game in the sprint. If it goes wrong, it goes catastrophically wrong within a fraction of a second and you're out of the running. The current world champions there, Arnaud Lieta and Marianne Faton of Switzerland. The Swiss have decided, I don't know why or how or when, but they are the specialists in the sprint now. They are absolutely dominated. And it is really interesting to see, and I'm going to come on to specialization just in a minute. We've already had 2 of those this year. They are exceptionally stressful to commentate because there's something happening all the time, but it's and you have to get the timings right, and but it's great. The relay, very fun, usually only happens at World Championships, European Championships, and it's a circuit of 2 ups, 2 downs, and there's a boot pack in the middle. Normally it's teams of 4 men in the men's category, 3 women in the women's category, but Olympic format is going to have 1 man and 1 woman doing 2 circuits each. And lastly, the individual race is the one we all know and recognize more easily, made up of at least 3 climbs, 3 descents, and it must include a boot pack. And in the last 3 we've had, or the 3 we've had this season, they've been pretty gnarly, technical, scary looking boot packs, which is what they love. And so it's, yeah, that's what they love, but they're always there. And they're off piste as much as possible, although we have in bad weather been known to loop around resorts, which makes athletes very unhappy, but safety first. And that race takes usually about 1.5 to 2 hours, depending on the category. The kit, I was just going to very briefly mention that as well. I was talking about the skis. The men's maximum, minimum is 780 grams is the ski weight, and 730 for the women. It used to be 750 and 700, but this year the Federation has introduced ski brakes for the first time, which was massively controversial at the beginning of the season, and everybody was up in arms, and it's going to be terrible, and it's going to ruin everything, and nothing has happened. They're all fine. It has worked. Nobody has lost any ground because of their ski brakes, so happy days. Their boots weigh 500 grams or 450 for the women. As you can see from the pictures, they don't wear a huge amount. I had some pictures there. That is Rémi Bonnet in the vertical. I think that was in Andorra earlier this year. Coming up, as you can see, minimal amounts of kit. The sprint race, some pictures there from Ponte di Legno in Italy in December under the floodlights. and that they go up. That was a really steep course, but it's, as I say, 65 meters full throttle. And the individual, so this picture on the left is quite an old one. You can see Kilian Jornet there with the bright orange helmet with the arms outstretched. A lot of those racers are still there, and I can tell you right now that start lines do not look like that in COVID times now. They are spread out, they are wearing masks, and it is a much less cozy affair, shall we say. But that, you know, it's always the same. The pole position, the top athletes are at the front. Another couple of start lines there for you. Actually, once I put those together, I realized that was the same start line, but there you go. That's them setting off. That's the senior men setting off. Some pictures. These are not mine. I was very, very kindly given these by one of the ISMF photographers. I asked him last week if he could give me some pictures to show you. On the left there, Lena Bonnel of France, very good sprinter. Top right, Alessandra Schmidt of Switzerland, in the red and white of Switzerland. She just was on her podium for the first time this weekend on the individual race, so she was very excited. And in the bottom right-hand corner is Rhea Coble of the United States, who is not a particularly good ski mountaineer yet, but she is a 4-time obstacle course race world champion. And that is what we're finding with the sport going to the Olympics. People from other sports, really, really successful athletes from other sports are thinking, oh, hold on a minute, here's a new sport. I know how to ski. I know how to do this. Perhaps I could go to the Olympics. And so we've got people like Rhea, which is great because it takes up it really brings up the professionalism of the sport, because these are people with the right mindset, the right attitude, the right, you know, they've come to learn, but they're already world champions. One of the leading women is Toby Alexanderson. She is a world champion in orienteering, ski orienteering, and sky running, I want to say, if I'm not wrong, and it just brings such a huge level of professionalism to the sport. A few others there. Here we go. That's them skiing. That's some of the senior women. Oh no, that top left's not a senior woman, but the others are. The Italians absolutely caning it down on their crazy tiny skis. Top left there with the bright yellow gloves, that's Robert Antonioli, the world #1. And to see him ski, I think I mentioned it earlier, is something else altogether. Michele Boscacci on the right there. The two of them, along with Matteo Edelin, are the record holders for the Patrouille des Glaciers, which, for those of you who know the Patrouille des Glaciers, I don't know if you know the record, but let me tell you that it's 65 kilometers, 4,000 meters of vertical. And I wish I could see you in person, because I'd love to ask you if you knew what you thought the record would be. But the record for 65 kilometers and 4,000 meters of vertical is 5 hours and 35 minutes. It's insane. I wasn't even at the top of the first climb in that time. So it's pretty incredible. So just talking about, you can see this yourselves afterwards if you like. I just thought I would show you the top rankings in the men's and women's at the moment. France, Sweden, a couple of odd ones in there. Slovakia, Belgium in amongst the men. Maximilien Drion lives in Switzerland, trains with the Swiss team, but represents his country, which he's very proud of. And at the Olympics in Milan in 2026, there will only be 48 racers in total, 24 men and 24 women. So the places are extremely sought after. And what is not clear yet is how they're going to be allocated. Will the bigger national teams be given more than one spot each? How do you narrow down when, you know, you can, not particularly right now, but often 7 out of the top 10 men are Italian. So how do you choose? That will be tricky. One option is to choose your best all-rounder, such as somebody like Robert Antonioli, but he's getting a bit old now, so I don't know that he'll maybe be one of the best in 4 years. I mean, he's 31. He's not old, but in SkiMo terms, he's getting on a bit. But otherwise, you choose your absolute best sprinter, for example, Arno Lieto of Switzerland, who's pretty decent at some of the other disciplines, and you know that you'll get gold in one, but you get points in the other disciplines. It's going to be interesting to see how the federations go for that. So this season we have 6 World Cups and a European Championships. We did have a 7th one going to Turkey, but that has had to be cancelled. And some athletes for the first time are saying that they're not racing some of the disciplines. Back in the day, when I first started, everybody raced everything. You just raced everything. You trained for all of them. You trained for the fast and short. You trained for the Sufferfest. You trained for the ups and downs and the boot packing and everything. And people are not doing that anymore. The athletes some are, but they are starting to specialize. And I mentioned the Swiss specializing in sprint. And for example, Axel Gachet-Molleret, who's the world #1, current world champion, she became world champion 6 months after her first baby was born. Insane. She's not insane, that is insane. And but she's not racing in the sprints this year. She is racing only in the individuals and the verticals because that's what she wants to concentrate on. And so it's leaving the rankings wide open because everybody else is doing, lots of the others are doing all of them. So you can see here on the top 10 ranking that she's #3, although she is quite phenomenally far ahead in in the categories she does race in. Anyway, sorry, I'm slightly geeking out over the rankings here. It's probably not that interesting for you. Maybe it is, maybe not. But it's defining the sport differently. And that's one of the things that is the evolution of the sport. It's becoming a bit more like athletics or equestrianism, where people say, right, well, I'm not that good at that, or I don't want to concentrate on that, or I don't have the time for this particular discipline, so I'm going to concentrate on the shorter for whatever reason. And my new role in the evolution of the sport is that this year we have introduced live streaming. And the link will be at the end, and I'm sure Declan can get it out to everybody if you fancy watching. We've live streamed 4 races so far this year over 3 World Cups, 2 sprints and 2 verticals. And I have to say it's probably one of the most nerve-wracking starts to a season I have ever had, but absolutely thrilling. I'm still learning the differences between being a race commentator and a live streaming host. As I say, it's caused me a few sleepless nights, but I'm learning and I get to do all sorts of great things. I'm live streaming. As I say, I'm learning so much more about the athletes and the sports and the disciplines, but I'm also filming pieces to camera, doing interviews. I help with the post-production. I write and voice the recap videos, which you can also find in one of the links that I'm going to send. And then the videos are put to the story that I write. So it's really exciting and it's teaching me a lot, and it's allowing me to use skills that I had but wasn't quite sure that I had, if that makes any sense at all. And I've learned so much about sport. I've learned about this sport and about my job in the last 8 years. I've learned to love the pounding heart, the bursting lungs, and the burning legs. And I've seen sure favourites lose a skin or make a mistake in transition on a sprint race and lose out to those who had better fortune that day. I've been stood up by Kilian Jornet at a flower ceremony. He was later disqualified. And that was one of the worst days of my life because he and the rest of the podium were protesting the results due to a penalty, and they just didn't turn up. And I was standing in the puking snow saying, Kilian Jornet, Kilian Jornet. And that was really, I hate that that's one of the things I remember most, but it was awful, so awful. But I got through it. And what I realized after that was that actually nobody's very interested in the speaker or the live streaming commentator. And what I mean by that is one of the best lessons I've learned is that while it is absolutely necessary to have the confidence to speak into a microphone, to be able to share your knowledge of the sport and what's happening that day, quite frankly, you are the last person on a long list of priorities. It's never, ever, ever about the commentator. It's about the athletes, the sport, the passion, but not the commentator. And it's difficult to balance sometimes, because when you're someone who likes talking into a microphone, you have to be interested and excited, interesting and excited about what's happening so that people will listen, but not so much over the top that they start to get annoyed or pay attention to you as a person. You have to be a safe pair of entertaining hands, and that's, I'm learning. One of the highlights of my career happened a couple of weeks ago in Andorra. And here you see a picture of, on the left, me interviewing Leticia Aru, who I had no idea who she was. That was me on that famous day in 2014 in Verbier, interviewing her at the end of the race. And there we are, 8 years later, sitting in a commentating booth together, commentating the World Cup. And I was a little bit starstruck, I'm going to be perfectly honest, but she is a 17-time world champion. She's the female record holder of the PDG. She is a 7-time winner of the Pierramenta, and it was a huge honor for me. And I feel like it's, you know, I'm not far off my next big birthday, and this is just starting to get really exciting. So what I thought I would just finish off with was, if anyone wants to get involved in racing, oh, that's the wrong photo, but I'm going to just quickly tell you a couple of things that I've got out of it as well, very quickly. These are my kids, racing on podiums, SkiMo racing, super young. Nearly all the races here have kids races, and they're tiny. They're like 125 meters of vertical, 200 meters of vertical. But they're so well done, and there's just volunteers everywhere, and they just love it. And it teaches them about sport, it teaches them about teamwork, and, you know, I know lots of other things and places do that, but I find it so incredible that they've had this opportunity so early in life, living with it right on their doorstep. This is us the first weekend of lockdown. We ran away to the mountains, right up, not far from the Grand St. Bernard. Maybe we shouldn't, but that was the first night, and we just thought we would get away. We didn't see anybody else, honest. And we made a fire, and we put tents up. And so this is one of the other things that I've learned. It's about family time. At the hospice at Grand St. Bernard for my birthday, very dorky hat combo for me there, but it worked. I can walk the dog very easily, kills 2 birds with 1 stone. And do you remember I said I couldn't say yes to adventures? Well, now I can. And I can go on adventures in summer and in winter. And I've seen way more sunrises than I ever had before in my life. What I was going to talk about was, if you want to get involved as an elite athlete, you can, if you're British, because this is my husband on the start line of the sprint race at the 2016 European Championships here in Switzerland. He told the Great Britain SkiMo Federation of his sporting prowess, and they gave him a license to race. He was last, but, you know, he got in and he had a lovely time. His biggest humiliation of the day, not being last, was that they actually registered him as a Swiss athlete. So he felt like he had pretty much let down the Swiss side. But anyway, there you go. So if you want, I'm pretty sure if you're French, Swiss, or Italian, you will not have this opportunity, but perhaps as a Brit, you might. Contact your local federation. You can find them all on the ISMF website, which will be coming out to you later. And you can get into refereeing and coaching. Refereeing, you can contact the ISMF. They're always looking for mountain people to take on the really important roles as the sport goes from strength to strength in its professionalism. It's not a very well paid job, but I think it's a really worthy job, and the referees in the 8 years I've been doing it have just come on in leaps and bounds. They are so much more professional, so much more calm and able to deal with whatever happens. So it's really, that is an opportunity. As for volunteer, I know from Catie that some of you have volunteered on races before, but there's always opportunities in any time there's a local race being organized, from everything from handing out the badges to putting out the tracks, or you could be like one Swiss volunteer who at last transition on a big race I did, gave us all a shot of some sort of gut rotting homemade hooch, and that got us up the last climb with a bit of a fire in our bellies. I wouldn't recommend it all the time, but there you go. And if you want to race in local races, SkiMo Scotland, if they're back, when there's snow, when there's no COVID, I know they do some races. I'm always happy to recommend races in Switzerland, in my part of the world. I can help with that very happily. I've done some of them, as I said, and I know people who've done lots of the others. And if anybody was wondering, I did go on to complete the 2018 Patrouille de Glaciers from Zermatt in an all-female team in 14 hours and 27 minutes. We had 4 goals. One was to finish. The first one was to finish as friends, because I've seen people cross that line and not speak to each other ever again. The second was to do it in 14 hours, which we kind of missed by 27 minutes, but that's not a big deal. And the third was just to finish. And the last one, which we managed with flying colors, was to beat Pippa Middleton's time of 2016. So hooray, we did that. And of the 1,600 teams on the start line that year across all 4 races, we were one of only 23 all-female teams to finish the big race. And that picture was definitely taken by Ellie Shearbeck, who is in the audience. Thank you, Ellie, because it is one of my most precious photos. And it remains one of the things I am most proud of in my life, going from someone who hated sport to doing one of the toughest ski mountaineering races in the world. Makes me quite emotional just to think about it. It also helps me in my job to say that I've done it. I'm going to be quite honest. It gives me a little bit of credence, if you like, kudos, if that's the right word. And I wish I could tell you more about the other Grand Course races, such as Pyramenta, Mezzalama, the Tour de Retour, but I'm afraid you're going to have to ask another speaker for that. That's me. Here are lots of links, and I'd be absolutely thrilled to answer any questions if you're still here.
Just a quick question from me to kick off. You mentioned refereeing and penalties. I wasn't aware of any of the strict rules. Surely all is fair in SkiMo.
Well,
first up, first down.
Let me just show you something. I'm packed and ready to go to Italy tomorrow morning, and here the rule books is the rule book, and it comes with a whole lot of appendices. So yeah, it's a good question, because in sort of amateur SkiMo racing, I've never come across it, but within the federation, within the elite circuit, there have to be rules. And it's one of the big evolutions of, in my experience in the last 8 years, of the federation, and the fact they now have athlete representatives, coach representatives, is that the rules have evolved. They have become rules that are set by people who have raced. Whereas a lot in the earlier years, when I was first involved, it was people who set rules because there had to be rules. I'm perhaps being a little unfair, but let me give you an example of things that people get penalties for. 2 weeks ago, when we were in Andorra, Matteo Edelin, who is the current world champion in the individual race, everybody knows he sails fairly close to the wind on the rules. And in this particular instance, he got busted because he went outside the kick turns, the marked kick turns. He went outside the marked flags. So green flags for up, red flags for down, and yellow flags for boot pack. And he got penalties. So he got a 5-minute penalty, which took him from winning the race to being 5th, I think. One of the most common penalties, in fact, the sprint race has probably usually has the most penalties because there's so much going on and there's so many transitions and it's very fast. And one of the big things is that when you come into transition, you must put your poles down on the ground and then you do your transition, pick them up and go. You must also, in transition, you must have your skins right inside and your top zipped right up so they can't be flapping out. It's all safety stuff. You know, if your skins fall out and trip someone up, or you get to the next transition and you don't have your skins, well, then you're a bit stuck. But yes, penalties are a big thing. They cause a lot of stress and hassle at the finish line sometimes because, you know, people rightfully feel very excited when they've won. And within a few minutes, there's reports of penalties and people move down the rankings. And yeah, so yes, it is a very well-regulated sport.
But not so much at the grassroots level. Not
in my experience, no.
Jonathan Bamber, do you want to unmute? You have a question.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for that, Katie. Absolutely fascinating insight to something that I've dabbled in, but you know, didn't know half of most of that actually. Just a quick observation. There was an Igor Ski Club team the same year that you did the PDG, and I think we finished within a few minutes of each other because Ella got photos of us on the finish line very close to each other. Yeah. So yeah, I've got a very similar photo to that thanks to Ella. So
nice.
So you know, I quite like doing these. I quite like doing competitive events in general. But one thing, I moved to Germany recently. I've really frustrating time trying to find what events are actually out there. There's no centralized calendar. There's the ISMF events, which are all listed, but there are all these smaller local events, often held in resorts that aren't particularly well advertised, and it's really difficult to find out what's actually going on. I've spent hours and hours trying to find out about events in Austria, and you know, some are advertised locally, some are on the SkiMo Stats website, but you know, is there some sort of magic tool to this working out where there are events and what's going on when? Because it's like, it just seems like total missed opportunity, really.
Yeah, no, I find that the same. Even myself, having lived here for 12 years, been involved in SkiMo for 8. I happen to know there is a journalist who's a keen ski mountaineer who puts out a list every year, but it's like some sort of secret club. If you find him, you can find the information. If you're near to Austria, I can recommend you check out SkiMo Austria. They're not the federation.
I've been on it.
Yeah, that's not the federation there. He's run by a guy called Karl Posch, and he's probably your best bet for that neck of the woods. And he's super helpful. Tell him I sent you. He texts me regularly during my commentating. Yeah, Katie, very good, very good. And I was like, I'm busy.
Just out of it, are you commentating at Berchtesgaden?
Is that the Masters this year?
It's the German National Championships. It's on the.
No, I'm not. This year I'm just doing the World Cup. I was in Berchtesgaden, as you know, as I said, maybe you heard a couple of years ago, but no, I would love to go back, but not this year.
Okay, all right. Thanks. That's fine.
Right. Ella Shearbeck.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, it's Ellie. Katie, I think many of us may have seen the picture of the army racer, all dressed in white as the army do, being piggybacked over the line by one of his team members. And I was wondering, are there rules as to how you finish? Is it so long as you set off on your skis? You were talking about penalties, but once you get to that final kilometre in Verbier, are there any rules as to how you should cross the finish line? So the army guy who got a piggyback from his teammate, would they have been, penalized in any way? But at least for themselves, they finished.
It's a good question, and not one I know the answer to in terms of the PDG, because that's a grande course event, like one of the big ones, and I don't know their specific rules. I can tell you that event I was telling you about right at the beginning, when Kilian Jornet came across the line on foot rather than on skis, he actually crossed the line first, but he was penalized for not having his skis on. So that's as much as I can tell you in terms of that.
I had another question which related to your trip up the Grand Combat.
Yes.
Which I think would probably interest everyone here as well. Was that a normal ski de randonnée trip?
Yes, yes, that was just, we went with a guide. We drove round to Lide. I think we went to Lide and we came up that side. You can come up from Fionnet, I think, up the Val de Bagne and up that way. But that time we went up there. And it's the most extraordinary thing, because you come up and there was like 2 other groups that day we saw. And
can you remind us of the height? 4,000?
No, it's not a 4,000. It's 3.
Oh, 3.8.
It says 3,866 or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, it's touching. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we come up and it's beautiful, it's peaceful, it's quiet, apart from our hideously heavy breathing. And you sort of climb over this lip into like almost like a crater. And suddenly, and I'm not kidding you, we had no idea till we got over this lip, which was shorter than me. There was like 50 people all standing there, having just been dropped off by the helicopter a couple of 100 feet away. And you have to sort of drop down and then go up to the summit. But it was the most extraordinary thing ever. And of course, we sort of hammed it up massively with people saying, "How did you get here?" "Oh, yeah, we just walked up.
Fantastic. Was that part of your preparation for a race?
It was actually part of our prep for the small PDG back in 2016.
Yeah.
And everyone kept saying, "Why are you doing such huge things for the small PDG?" And basically we just wanted to, and we had opportunities to go out with guides, so we did.
And also you didn't know how fit you needed to be because you hadn't done it before.
No, exactly. And as I say, having come from a background of no real sport, I had no idea how I would cope with that was a 5.5-hour trip up. And I didn't know how I would be. I didn't know how I would feel. I didn't know how I would feed myself properly. So we had to do a few of them to really, start working towards it.
And a final very quick question. So it's not an Olympic discipline yet then?
It will be in 2026.
Okay.
It's an invitational. It's an invitational in 2026 by the Italian Federation, or the Italian Olympic Committee. And we just have to keep our fingers crossed that we don't make a mess of it and we get invited back, or we get properly put into the Olympics.
So you'll be pitching for that job then?
Oh yes, that's the goal. But I try not to think that big, because then I just get scared about the next race.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Yes. A couple of questions. I was one of the team members with Jonathan earlier on the PDG, so I dabble in SkiMo also. I missed the first half of your lecture, unfortunately, but I came in just as you were talking about sports persons from other disciplines coming into SkiMo. And I just wondered, are there any skiers, cross-country skiers coming into SkiMo? Because I live in Finland, where cross-country skiing is massive, and I've always thought and realized that it is one of the most intensively physical sports of any sort, and with a very long history of training and conditioning, and they must be some of the fittest athletes in the world. And I think it would be really interesting if some of those move into SkiMo, and it'd be interesting to see what happens. Do you know of any?
I do actually, as it happens. And it is one of the things that people have been talking about, because the production company that we're using for all of this now, they come from a very, very strong biathlon background. And I think they would love to encourage people from that, you know, those kinds of sports. In 2014, actually, that famous, infamous race that I commentated on for the first time, not knowing anything from anybody, there was a Spanish cross-country skier called Laura Orgay. Maybe you've heard of her, but I don't know what her credentials were, but she was a very, very successful cross-country skier, and she decided to take up SkiMo. The problem that she had was that she was immensely powerful and super strong in the vertical, but she couldn't ski. So it sort of limited her to one discipline. And I think what ski mountaineers pride themselves on is that it is not just about fitness. It's not just fitness. There is so many elements to it. And so while you're absolutely right to say that, you know, the biathletes and the cross-country skiers are some of the fittest people in the world, you know, there's a lot more to it.
There's more to it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I had another quick question. What about drug taking in the sport?
What about what? So, drug taking. Well, there's a very strict anti-doping regulations. We have one of those things in my big book of things is the anti-doping rules, and athletes are tracked as in many other sports. You know, there's certain athletes picked to say they have to say where they are at all times for a certain period of time. Winners are always drug tested at the end, and random numbers are picked from the winning. Even if you don't finish, you can still be dope tested at the end. So far, as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any, but who knows? I honestly don't know. I don't even think there's, I've never even heard rumors of it. So.
Okay, yeah, good to hear. Yeah,
but you know,
great.
With the evolution of the sport, sadly, that is always a possibility, I suspect.
It will come, yes, yeah. Thanks.